Alright, today we're going to be taking a closer look at the LK Chen White Serpent, which is quite a pretty one. This is a reproduction of an original sword from the Ming Dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644. And when you pick this up, immediately you're just blown away by how light and incredibly well balanced it is. You can easily hold it with 2 fingers, like this, no problem. It's a featherweight. So you can perform very quick cuts. Basically, the speed of the arm is pretty much the same as with the sword. My guess, based on this design, is that it's intended for unarmored dueling. Because frankly, against armor, you just wouldn't really be able to do a whole lot because it doesn't have that much mass. And it is not a tip designed to either bypass or penetrate armor. Sure, you could try to thrust into the gaps with this point, but it is relatively rounded. It wouldn't be all that effective. But of course, in a duel against an unarmored opponent, even just this, just a quick cut like this, would be quite effective, particularly to the hands, arms, would be very much debilitating. And of course, it allows you to respond very quickly to attacks. So you can easily swing this around and thrust and maneuver without getting tired out whatsoever. And the balance is pretty close to the hilt, but enough that you have a certain amount of blade presence for effective cuts. The balance is in part achieved by this long handle here. From what I understand, it's not intended for use with 2 hands, even though my barbarian Western ass, of course, likes to do that because I'm most familiar with long swords, even though this one made me pay for that. I'll give it my best shot, I guess.
What in the f is he doing?
Ow. Oh, this is not designed for 2-handed use. Oh.
Ooh, that's like a blood blister. It's like a
Yep, it is. With a different kind of pommel, it's fine, but this one,
it just
oof, that was a really bad idea. Terrible idea indeed. This is not a hand-and-a-half sword. This is a single-handed sword, and this is really just for a different balance. And I suppose if you wanted to, you could switch hand position, like you could move the hand a little bit further down for slightly more reach. I don't know if that was done, but either way, it is absolutely beautiful in terms of handling. It's you'd be hard pressed to find any sword that's more lively and agile than this. At the expense of cutting power, of course, but that doesn't mean that it's a slouch when it comes to cuts. So I did the usual tests on water bottles, some of them wrapped in leather, some of them with a wooden dowel inside to give them more resistance. All went pretty well. You have to excuse my poor form there. That was early on in the year and I hadn't done much cutting in between, so it's a little bit sloppy. It makes me cringe a bit to look at that. But either way, it shows you what the blade is capable of for the most part. Easier than expected. I didn't have any problems until I moved on to soaked tatami mats with wooden dowels in them that were just a little bit too thick. It couldn't really deal with harder targets, at least in my hands. I would like a heftier blade for that purpose. And as said, against armor, you would definitely want a different kind of sword as far as I see it. But overall, it did quite well. I didn't do abusive testing as such. There were some pretty hard impacts on those wood core tatami mats, which I think show well enough that this is properly put together and doesn't loosen up easily. Because what's the point of me hacking into wood or a shield or something like that? It's just, it doesn't seem designed for that purpose, and it would just not really tell you all that much, even though I do think, based on the construction, looking at how tightly everything is fitted, I don't think it would be a problem. You could probably abuse this quite a bit. I just wouldn't recommend it as such, and I don't think it's appropriate for a test like this. Anyway, so speaking of fit and assembly, everything is perfectly tight. I definitely like to see how little gap there is right here. Everything is precisely fitted, and also the pin going through here, which is pinned over top of this flower fitting there. That's all done very well. You've got a hollow rivet right here, pinning it in place. So nothing wrong here, and there's also nothing wrong with the shape of the grip at all. It's very nice. So you can see it's basically an oval cross section. It's all rounded and smoothed over, so that feels quite good. But it's wide enough relative to the thickness that you can index the blade properly and don't have any issues with alignment there. This fitting here, like, I never like this kind of thing. Anything that sticks out in profile of the handle is usually uncomfortable. This one is actually fine because they polished it well enough that it's not abrasive, it doesn't rub on your hand, and it's really not that much in the way. The tip of my middle finger rests on it and I can feel it on the palm, but again, it doesn't bother me at all, surprisingly. Normally I would rant about this, but it's not a problem here. Then aesthetically, very nice. Just looking at all the decorations here, the brass guard is ornamented with a serpent and flower motif, and the pommel also has quite a nice intricate pattern here, which looks great. There are some flaws here and there, like for example, on the guard, you can see that the casting is not perfect. There are some pits. So this is not a $1,000 plus kind of finish, but considering the price, that's totally fine. You can always tell the difference between a $200, $400, $800 and a $1,000 sword or above. It's just, there are going to be certain differences in just how fine and flawless the finish can be. But the scabbard is also quite well made. Now these fittings here are inspired by Tibetan designs. Beautiful. I would say you should be a little bit more careful with these since it's just brass and there are holes and cutouts in it. So don't be too rough with this. You might break it otherwise, but it is nicely presented and also quite solid. The fit is great. So if I sheath it, it depends on how far you insert it. If you push it all the way in, so there's no more gap, then this is very tight and requires a really firm tug. But you can adjust it. You can just stop when you feel resistance, and then you're able to draw it more easily. So that's all up to you. No problem here. This fitting here, the throat of the scabbard came loose for me and had to be re-glued, which is pretty common whenever you change from one climate zone to the other. Glue can soften up and wood can expand or shrink and crack and things like that. So I'm not really concerned about that, but it's something to point out for the sake of completion. The blade is nicely shaped, very even, and looks like somewhere between a lenticular and a diamond cross-section. It's properly tapered toward the edges. It's a nice smooth grind. You don't see a secondary bevel at all. So that's of course good for cutting performance, and it performed quite well in that regard. You can see the pattern. The blade is pattern welded and the close-up is quite nice. So no complaints about the blade here at all. In terms of flexibility, it has some flex, but it's not excessive, and I didn't notice any problems when cutting. No excessive vibration, anything like that. Yeah, I think that's about it. It always almost bothers me a little bit when I can't find anything negative, particularly if, like in this case, it's something that was sent to me for free for review, so there's a possibility of bias. But no matter how in-depth I look at it and try to find some kind of flaw, it's really just very minor things. Like, I said, the finish on the brass guard, it could be better, but at the same time, could it really, for this price, could it be better? Probably not. So I really can't fault this thing for anything. Like, again, handling is absolutely beautiful. It's incredibly lively. Like, you have to feel it to believe it, basically. Like I said, like, I can show you like this, you know, when I hold it with 2 fingers, you can kind of tell. But yeah, either way, it's great. It's very well made. It seems to be close to the original from what I can tell based on the pictures. And yeah. If you like this type of sword, get it. That's really all I can say. I'm very pleased with it. So, hope you are pleased with the review as well. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks. As usual, a link to the sword and specifications are in the description down below.